museum of boring things. Here, ordinary objects rest beneath the hush of time. We gather not for spectacle, but for stillness, to trace the quiet ingenuity pressed into everyday form. Tonight's exhibit is the rubber band, fashioned in obscurity, indispensable in practice, carrying the soft weight of anonymous invention. Let your thoughts uncoil and your breath settle in. Should drowsiness arrive before our story concludes, consider it a courtesy of the collection. Now let us open the glass case and listen for the silence between its hinges. Here in Gallery 4B, situated modestly between the hall of felt-tipped pens and the vestibule of index cards, lies a single loop of tan, matte-finished rubber. It rests in a velvet-lined drawer with no label and no fanfare, a ring neither ornamental nor alarmingly useful, simply there, inert, elastic, poised perhaps to do something unremarkable with quiet confidence. But like all great tools of humble lineage, the rubber band's journey begins far from office drawers and kitchen junk trays. It begins, in fact, in the shadows of ancient groves, where trees bled milk-white sap in response to nothing in particular. Long before invention, there was collection. Human hands, curious and always sticky, would press against the bark of a certain tree. Hevea brasiliensis, though no one was calling it that yet, and withdraw with fingers coated in something simultaneously unpromising and intriguing. This material was not immediately useful. It clung, it crumbled, it rotted, but it also bounced. It resisted pulling. It remembered its shape, as though it had a private geometry tucked within its fibers, and so, quietly and without ceremony, it was stored, played with, set beside fire, tied around things that did not want to be tied. The earliest uses of this sap, later dubbed rubber, by a man with a pencil and too much enthusiasm, were tentative. Its promise lay dormant until curiosity aligned with inconvenience. There were things in the world that needed to stay together without being glued, things that ought to hold tight, but not stay tight forever. And in that niche, narrow, elastic, underappreciated, the rubber band would eventually find its home. Of course, sap alone would not do. Raw rubber sweated in summer, cracked in cold, and gave up entirely in humid climates. It was, to put it mildly, unpredictable, like a cat trained to carry groceries. To tame it required alchemy disguised as chemistry, and so emerged vulcanization, a name far grander than the process it represented. Sulfur, heat, and just enough blind faith transformed rubber from moody to manageable. It became stretchable and obedient, no longer at the mercy of the weather's whims. Now imagine a man, call him Stephen or Thomas, or perhaps someone even more forgettable, staring at a lump of vulcanized rubber and asking, what if I cut it into circles? A fair question, a useful one. The answer, of course, was the rubber band. Not a name, not yet, but in form. A closed loop, snipped from a tube, that could be flung, snapped, wrapped, or filed without fuss. This early iteration was less than glorious. It resembled a sad halo, or a snake biting its tail in resignation. Yet it had all the elements of greatness, simplicity, function, and a willingness to be forgotten. The rubber band did not demand praise. It merely held things together. Factories, those tireless humming hives of repetition, soon discovered the joy of slicing tubes into rings. Machines that once stamped coins or punched shoes now turned their gaze to rubber, crafting circles with an enthusiasm bordering on clinical detachment. Uniformity emerged. consistency arrived. The rubber band was no longer a novelty. It was a product. But products require purpose, and so they sought one. Office workers wrapped them around folders. Postmen bundled them around letters. Children launched them across classrooms with a force that defied their size. The rubber band entered homes and workplaces alike, not with a bang, but with a light stretch and a soft whip. Here, in this museum, we hold an original specimen. If original can be applied to something so iteratively dull, its color has faded from ochre to something like tired straw. It no longer stretches. It simply surrenders. But even in its inert state, one can sense the ghost of tension it once held, the quiet pressure it once applied to envelopes, asparagus, and bad hair days alike. What makes the rubber band remarkable is not its design. It has none, really, nor its ambition, of which it has even less. It is a thing that waits. It does not open or close. It simply is, in a state of eternal readiness. It has no front, no back, no right way up. It is a circle, technically, but spiritually, it is a shrug. Its manufacturing today is so optimized as to be almost offensive. Rubber is blended, extruded, cooled, sliced, and packaged in a ballet of machinery that never once asks, why? A single factory can produce thousands of rubber bands an hour, each one nearly indistinguishable from the last. It is mass production at its most indifferent, and yet the world is no less grateful. They arrive in bags. They vanish in drawers. They reappear in places they have no business being, around spoons, inside shoes, holding together things that should have been discarded years ago. They form alliances with paper clips and thumbtacks in the mysterious diplomatic pouch, known as the miscellaneous office supply drawer. And when they break, as they inevitably do, it is never with drama. Just a soft snap, a flinch, a brief sting on the wrist. A protest, not a rebellion. Their deaths are quiet. Their remains are discarded without eulogy. And yet, without them, small chaos would flourish. Envelopes would burst. Pencils would scatter. Bundles would unbundle. The modest tyranny of order would falter, and entropy would celebrate in minor victories. So tonight, as we peer into this drawer and regard the desaturated, brittle loop within, we remember not what it once held, but that it held it all. That it was content to stretch, to yield, to bind, and to release. The rubber band may not inspire poetry, though one could imagine a haiku, but it performs a task both simple and profound. It says, with no words and no expression, I will hold this for you until you no longer need me. And that, perhaps, is all one could ask of a thing. Let us return then to the tree, patient and generous, whose sap offered the first whisper of elasticity. Though Hevea brasiliensis was destined for industrial conscription, it began as a simple presence in humid forests, producing latex not out of ambition, but as a quiet form of self-defense, a natural secretion meant to seal wounds, deter insects, and resume stillness. The rubber tree was not eager to serve us. We arrived uninvited, saw potential, and stayed. Harvesting latex in its earliest form was an oddly meditative process. Tappers would score the bark with practiced hands, encouraging the sap to weep into small cups or coconut shells. These gentle wounds would heal, and the tree would offer more. Each incision a dialogue, each drop a reluctant gift. For centuries, this gift languished in obscurity. South American communities found local uses, waterproofing, toys, ritual objects, but the broader world remained blissfully unaware of its stretchable promise. It was not until the European appetite for utility met the botanical enthusiasm of colonial ambition that rubber began its slow, sticky march toward ubiquity. The band, as we know it, was still far off. Early experiments with rubber were frustrating at best. Balls that melted in heat, shoes that shattered in cold. Inventors grew enamored and then betrayed, often in the span of a single afternoon. It was the material of almosts, nearly useful, not quite dependable. A heartbreak, but a pliable one. The turning point, as with many such tales, arrived through accident and persistence, vulcanization, named not for the god of fire, but for marketing, was less a scientific discovery and more a stubborn dance with temperature. Charles Goodyear, a man as tenacious as he was financially doomed, discovered that adding sulfur to rubber and applying heat transformed it into something astonishingly cooperative. It resisted weather. It retained shape. It acquired manners. Vulcanized rubber was not merely a refinement, it was an emancipation. Freed from its natural moodiness, rubber became a material of reliability. It could be trusted, filed, sorted, standardized. The rubber band's theoretical existence was now plausible, if not yet fashionable. The earliest records of actual rubber bands, rudimentary, unnamed, and unassuming, emerged from enterprising minds who saw potential in simplicity. The notion was almost absurd: to take a tube of rubber, slice it into rings, and sell the rings. They were neither fasteners nor adhesives, neither cords nor clasps. They were, at best, holders of stuff. And yet this vague utility proved contagious. These early bands were crude, cut by hand, uneven in width, sometimes more oval than round. But they did something precious. They stretched and returned. They wrapped around without suffocating. They held without crushing. It was not elegance they offered, but tolerance. At this stage in our collection, we find a curious specimen, an early band dulled by age, with edges slightly frayed from the blade that made it. It is more ellipse than circle, more amber than tan. It likely spent its working life around a stack of ration coupons or a child as lunch money, a minor participant in forgotten transactions. As the 20th century arrived, factories took notice, and with factories came precision. Rubber was no longer a sticky plaything or experimental oddity. It was a substance with specifications. Machines could extrude, chill, slice, and package bands with metronomic regularity. They could be dyed, measured, and catalogued. Sizes were named: 116, 33, 64, with a confidence that suggested ancient taxonomy, though the numbers meant little to anyone outside the warehouses. The sheer range of band types began to expand. There were thick ones, thin ones, long ones, looped twice or thrice for ambition. Bands for broccoli, for banknotes, for newspapers. One could bind an entire bundle of daily ephemera in seconds and forget the action by lunch. The rubber band became both ubiquitous and invisible. It never starred in advertisements. It was not the subject of design debates. No one referred to their favorite brand. And yet it was everywhere. Desk drawers, cash registers, produce aisles, school bags. It arrived without fanfare and left without ceremony. One might think, in such a sea of quiet repetition, that the band would become predictable, but its uses began to wander. Postal workers wrapped stacks of letters. Gardeners secured seedlings. Dentists employed them in orthodontic strategies so quietly brutal one might forget the innocent loop as original purpose. Children, too, found unexpected joy in the band's potential. They crafted makeshift slingshots, bundled trading cards, created elaborate launch mechanisms in classrooms where paper projectiles soared just above the teacher's line of sight. The rubber band became a tool of rebellion as much as one of order, a silent partner in mischief. There is in the archive a drawer of novelty bands, those shaped like stars, hearts, animals. Their cheerful outlines suggest playfulness, though they are structurally no different. A gimmick laid upon a classic. Even in frivolity, the band held firm. As production scaled, the sources of rubber diversified. Natural rubber gave way, in parts, to synthetics, neoprene, nitrile, silicone, each with its own peculiar temperament. Some were hypoallergenic, others heat-resistant, some resilient to oil, others prone to crumble under UV light. The rubber band had grown up, diversified, spread itself thin across industries that barely noticed its presence. Its moment of peak ubiquity may have passed unnoticed. No parade marked the billionth band produced. No child dreams of becoming a rubber band designer. It remains content in its anonymity, tucked in the shadows of greater inventions, happy to serve without applause. And so we arrive at the middle of our contemplation, the rubber band fully formed and quietly employed in the machinery of daily life. Tomorrow it may break, or vanish, or be found months from now, holding together a recipe card and a dry pen, still willing. It will not complain. To continue our meditation on the unassuming loop that binds without binding, let us consider the paradox of permanence within impermanence. The rubber band, by design, is destined to perish. It stretches not in defiance of time, but in obedience to it, growing brittle, fading in hue, surrendering slowly to entropy. And yet, within that doomed arc lies a kind of reliability. We trust the rubber band precisely because it will not last. It exists to serve and snap. At the peak of industrial clarity, the manufacture of rubber bands became less an art than an arithmetic. Imagine a long cylindrical tube of warm rubber, extruded with meticulous regularity, and cut not with knives, but with rotating blades on endless belts. Each ring, a consequence of spacing, timing, and silent agreement, emerges not as a finished product, but as a sliver of an ongoing gesture. The bands are not made exactly. They are taken from a longer moment, sliced from continuity. Color was introduced without necessity. Red, blue, green, even fluorescent pink. But color was not meant to appeal to the eye. It was code. Postal bands in one shade, produce bands in another. Hospitals favored beige or white. Offices chose brown or yellow. And when the colors faded from memory, the bands remained, still clinging to their assigned duties. In time, the rubber band achieved its rarest form, standardization. It was measured not just by length, but by lay-flat length, thickness, width, tensile strength. It was assigned specifications down to the gram of resistance. Engineers, not poets, now whispered its virtues. No longer merely stretchy, a band might now be 0.04 inches in cross-sectional diameter with a durometer of 50 Shore. Still humble, now quantified. Meanwhile, its versatility bloomed in silence. Aerospace engineers used bands to hold temporary seals in place. Microbiologists wrapped them around test tubes. Paleontologists bound field notes in high winds. And in suburban garages, hobbyists sorted bolts and wires with a patience unknown to most administrative assistants. It is here, in this sprawling epoch of silent functionality, that the rubber band completed its quiet conquest of the human environment, and it did so without ceremony. There were no launch events, no marketing slogans, no ambassadors. No one announced the arrival of a better loop. Yet with this expansion came an irony too delicate to ignore. The more ubiquitous the rubber band became, the less likely it was to be noticed. It was not named in inventories. It was not listed in annual reports. It did not increase shareholder value. It simply held things together. And then one day broke. We must then acknowledge the pathos of its deterioration. A rubber band exposed too long to light or tension hardens, cracks. Sometimes it perishes in the act of stretching, heroic perhaps. More often it dies in a drawer, forgotten until the next attempt to bind something unbound. Its broken form resembles a question mark with no sentence. We exhibit here a small plastic box, unearthed from an office that closed in 1997. Inside, dozens of rubber bands in various states of decay. Some still stretchable. Others stiffened into unnatural postures, curled, looped, folded like parchment. Time, in this case, did not pass over them. It sat with them, pressed itself into their bodies, whispered, "Not today," until one day it was. Rubber, natural or synthetic, does not age kindly. Its enemies are silent. Ozone, sunlight, air itself. Even the oils of our skin conspire against it. And yet we handle rubber bands with bare hands, stretch them gleefully, store them in open trays. We trust them without question, even as they degrade under our care. Perhaps that trust is the true marvel, not in the engineering, but in the expectation. We expect a loop of vulcanized latex, mass-produced by indifferent machines, to perform perfectly in every situation, to stretch exactly so far, to hold exactly so long, to break only when we are done with it, or when fate deems the moment comically inconvenient. That they so often meet this expectation is not a minor feat. It is a quiet miracle repeated billions of times a day. Of course, not all bands are created equal. The number 64 band, beloved by mailrooms, is a classic, a gold standard of girth and pliability. The smaller number 16 finds its home in delicate tasks, bundling pencils, taming playing cards, keeping tea bags folded with dignified restraint. Extra-wide bands serve newspapers, manila envelopes, broccoli stems. Extra-long ones cradle yoga mats and umbrella bags. Somewhere between these extremes lives the everyday band, the median loop, elastic everyman, neither celebrated nor resented. These bands pass through lives unnoticed. They hold checks together in bank deposits. They survive pockets and purses, dust and drizzle. They live under the fluorescent lights of supermarkets, bundled around asparagus spears with a tension that is at once tender and unforgiving. And in the rare moments when rubber bands fail publicly, slingshot misfires, dental tension gone rogue, sudden twangs mid-task, we find for a fleeting instant that they are present, alive, that they have betrayed us only because we asked too much. There is a drawer in the museum, far back near the dehumidifiers, labeled elastic catastrophes. Inside are examples of failed ambition, a band that snapped under the weight of hope, a melted one that fused 2 credit cards for eternity, one that petrified into a perfect oval and was mistaken briefly for a bracelet. We do not laugh at them. We study them, quietly, with reverence, because each failure is also a reminder of countless silent successes. So we return then to our loop, our patient, pliable loop, and we regard its simplicity as neither flaw nor limitation. It does one thing over and over. It binds. It yields. It waits. In an age of upgrades and notifications, the rubber band does not alert you. It does not glow or beep. It offers no software. It offers only itself, round and quiet, a shape with no beginning or end. And that may be why it endures. In the far wing of the museum, past the section devoted to thumbtacks, and just before the quiet shelves of glue, there lies a display scarcely noticed by the hurried or the wakeful. It holds the instruments of making, the great cutters, rollers, molds, and motors that for more than a century shaped the rubber band into quiet obedience, not tools of grandeur, but of precision. Machines not praised, yet never doubted. Mass production of rubber bands is an act of uninterrupted choreography. One begins not with loops, but with slabs, long, flat sheets of rubber, smoothed into uniform thickness, like dough prepared for a recipe no one will read. These sheets are extruded in tubes, hollow and warm, waiting to become circles. The tubes are cured, cooled, and cleaned. Then, as though offering themselves to time, they are fed to slicing machines, steel teeth calibrated to a degree that feels excessive, yet necessary. 100 bands born from a single tube, not with fanfare, but with a rhythmic whir. They fall into bins like autumn leaves, uniform in descent, indistinguishable in form. Quality control removes the misshapen, the nicked, the overzealous. The rest are weighed, counted, sealed in plastic bags marked with numbers few understand. And then they are sent into shops, storerooms, shipping containers, and sundry drawers across the globe. One might ask why we still bother. Why, in an age of digital everything, do we still produce billions of these passive loops? The answer is uneventful. Because they work. Because no app will hold a stack of receipts together while fitting inside a trouser pocket. Because the rubber band does not crash, cannot be hacked, and requires no batteries. It simply waits, and when called upon, it complies. The factories that produce rubber bands vary in scale and enthusiasm. Some are grand operations with international clients and robotic precision. Others are modest, almost cottage-like, with machines inherited from previous decades, humming with worn belts and manual adjustments. Yet in both, the outcome is the same, a surplus of circles, destined for anonymous usefulness. Within our museum, we display a film reel, silent in black and white, showing a factory in mid-century Ohio. A worker feeds tubes into a slicer, her hands steady, her eyes half-interested. Each movement is efficient, though not rushed. There is a rhythm to it. Not quite pride, but something adjacent. Familiarity. Repetition, perhaps even comfort. A loop forming loops. She pauses once to inspect a finished band, holding it to the light. She stretches it gently. It passes the test. She sets it aside. The machine continues, indifferent to her thoughts. This human touch, however fleeting, once defined the rubber band's creation. Before full automation, each step required judgment. The rubber had to feel right, smell right, respond correctly to stretch and snap, a craft of sorts, though one never romanticized. No artisan ever wrote poetry to their cutting machine. As demand grew, so did the need for speed. Machines were upgraded. Rooms once filled with workers were reduced to rows of humming cabinets and conveyor belts. Efficiency climbed. Personality declined. And yet the bands, remarkably, did not complain. There was one factory, briefly, that attempted scented rubber bands: lavender, peppermint, citrus. The experiment failed. Users found the fragrances clashed with purpose. The bands were meant to vanish in use, not call attention to themselves with floral defiance. A failed rebellion. A loop too proud. Another facility tested biodegradable rubber bands, meant to dissolve gently over time. The idea pleased environmentalists, but displeased archivists. Documents returned from storage bound only by memory. A noble idea, but not a practical one. And so the original formula remained, not because it was perfect, but because it was good enough. A lesson in restraint, perhaps, in knowing when to stop improving. We exhibit here a rusted cutting wheel, once used in a Philippine factory during the 1970s. Its teeth are worn, its center stained with decades of oil and latex. It no longer spins, yet its shape remains intact, round, steady, capable of movement if only asked, much like the bands it once birthed. It is not beautiful, nor is it historic in the way we typically use the word, but it held purpose. It created continuity, and it now rests beside the very objects it once produced, not as relic, but as companion. This is the nature of mass production. Objects beget objects. Machines do not love what they make, but they make them nonetheless, reliably, unceasingly, until someone switches off the lights and forgets to return. Rubber bands do not remember their makers. They serve, they stretch, and when they break, they leave no will. But the machines remember. In rust, in wear, in the dust they collect on silent shop floors. So when you next find a band on your desk, consider not its purpose, but its origin. Somewhere, a machine moved, a tube turned, a blade descended, and a moment became a circle. You hold in your hand not merely a loop of rubber, but the evidence of 1,000 mechanical decisions, 100 ignored calibrations, and one tiny act of unnoticed success. It is, by all accounts, enough. The drawers of Gallery 4B contain, among other things, an envelope sealed not with glue, but with a thick red rubber band. It holds no letter, only clippings, photographs of market stalls, production lines, kitchen counters. In each, a rubber band doing exactly what it always does, holding, containing, existing on the periphery of purpose. And so we now turn our attention to the band's quiet infiltration into daily life, not through advertisement or revolution, but through endless mild utility. It never demanded entry. It simply arrived on asparagus stalks, newspaper bundles, and the wrists of people who had nothing better to do with their hands. The rubber band's adoption into domestic life was almost suspiciously smooth. Unlike other inventions that required instruction manuals, it never needed explanation. One sees it and understands. This stretches, and it returns. There is no correct way to use it, and yet everyone uses it correctly. It is a universal punctuation of containment. In kitchens, bands wrapped bags of rice, corralled rogue chopsticks, clung to jars whose lids had betrayed their threads. In bathrooms, they secured toothpaste tubes in final protest. In sewing kits, they held bobbins together like nervous roommates. And in garages, those temples of deferred projects, they formed makeshift hooks, tensioned clamps, or even low-stakes booby traps that startled but never harmed. Children turned them into slingshots, braces for cardboard armor, or makeshift currency in elaborate games with shifting rules. Pets feared them inexplicably. Teachers confiscated them with sighs. Dentists used them for torture thinly disguised as alignment. And still, they remained cheerful in form, unjudging in purpose. The workplace, too, accepted the rubber band without question. On desks, they gathered pens. In storage rooms, they bundled files, wrapped around mugs, door handles, light switches. They became solutions to problems no one had named. Even within financial institutions, those arenas of gravitas and decimal precision, rubber bands played a role. Money in its raw paper form was grouped and sorted by them. They became an accessory to capital, looping quietly around bundles of notes, anonymous but ever present. In our archives, we find a photograph from a 1980s supermarket stockroom. Crates of produce, each bundle of herbs tied not with twine, but with green bands. Some stamped with codes, others plain. The herbs are long gone, but the bands remain, brittle now, curled like dry leaves. Memory outlasting freshness. In agriculture, the rubber band found less noble, but no less essential work. It secured grafts and saplings, kept bags shut against curious squirrels, and marked livestock ears with numbered loops in neon pink. They served until they failed, and when they did, they were replaced without mention. A quiet mortality. In libraries, rubber bands formed loose alliances with catalog cards, map rolls, and pamphlets too humble for proper binding. They often became brittle in the dry air, snapping with the sound of regret. Librarians, unstartled, would sigh, replace them, and continue. It was part of the rhythm, even in hospitals where sterility rules with a strict white glove. Rubber bands found minor duties. Bundling tools for short-term use, sealing non-critical bags, acting as impromptu restraints for objects, not patients. Though not formally medical, they adapted to the mood of their environment. Clean, precise, invisible. One curious use emerged in film studios. Rubber bands wrapped around camera grips to provide traction. They marked focal ranges. They silenced rattles. They held caps and cables in place. In scenes where tension was literal, the band held firm just out of frame. Then there was fashion. Not high fashion, though even there one could argue for metaphor, but everyday fashion. Rubber bands as hair ties, as bracelet cores, as emergency button replacement systems, stretched over hangers to prevent slippage. In every case, uncredited. In the museum's collection lies a jar marked "Found on Floor." It contains dozens of rubber bands discovered in public places, subways, sidewalks, lecture halls. Each one tells the same story, that of having once been useful and then forgotten, lost not in failure, but in success. Having completed their task, they were allowed to drift. This is perhaps their most defining feature, disposability. Rubber bands do not expect loyalty. They serve, and then they vanish into drawers, bins, pockets, sometimes into the vacuum cleaner, never into memory. Yet their ubiquity is itself a form of permanence. One is never far from a rubber band. Even when not needed, they appear, clinging to broccoli, binding receipts, stashed in junk drawers as though planning something. They are, in a sense, the punctuation of the physical world. Not full stops, but parentheses, holding things loosely, temporarily, with the promise of return. In times of crisis, they are repurposed as emergency doorstops, as tourniquet precursors, as clumsy restraints, bookmarks, distraction devices. In every scenario, imperfect but present, we do not honor them for elegance. We honor them for availability, for readiness, for the fact that when other solutions fail, tape dries, glue breaks, fasteners vanish, a rubber band is always willing to try. And though its life may be short, its presence lingers in the corners of drawers, around unused chargers, and boxes labeled MISC. It is the friend you forgot to thank, who helped anyway. Let us regard it now, not in awe, but in understanding. The rubber band is not miraculous, it is merely consistent, and in that we find something rare. There is a drawer, unlabeled, unlit, tucked away in the museum's most indifferent corridor. Inside, the objects have no chronological order, no taxonomic clarity. A paperclip nestles beside a thumbtack. A shoelace loops through a forgotten keyring. But near the back, barely visible, is a cluster of rubber bands, some tangled, some singular, all resting in quiet defeat. It is not a curated display. It is a natural occurrence, a sediment of utility. And so we reach the global era of the rubber band, its expansion, its saturation, and its subtle domination of everyday systems. For while the object has remained largely unchanged, its reach has multiplied. It is the same loop, but in more places, doing more things for more people who notice it less. In logistics, bands became miniature lifelines. In warehouses, they secured tags, labels, codes. In shipping, they grouped goods not with pressure, but with permission. The band became the final link in a global chain, not a container, but a closure, not a guarantee, but a gesture. Mailrooms relied on them so thoroughly that bands were ordered by the kilogram, not by the count. They came in bulk, in shades that faded under fluorescent light. Mail sorted, wrapped, dispatched. Each bundle a moment of elasticity before inertia took over. In retail, the bands worked harder than most signage. They wrapped price tags, bundled units, closed promotional bags, secured returns. Their presence invisible to the customer, but not to the clerk whose hands bore the imprint of constant looping. Banks, long past their golden age of opulence, still respected the band. Though digital ledgers had replaced ledgers proper, cash remained tactile. Bundled with rubber bands, stacks of notes bore the silent witness of each transaction. No knot, no tape, just a loop, holding value in its soft circumference. In agriculture, bands evolved. Specialized loops held produce together with varying degrees of tension. Some were coated to resist water. Others carried barcodes, merging containment with communication. Broccoli, asparagus, green onions, all wore the band like a sash, humble and biodegradable in its ideal form. In science, the rubber band gained credentials. It entered laboratories, where it wrapped around vials, marked experiments, stabilized small equipment. Its simplicity made it welcome in environments that rejected complexity. Even in sterile spaces, a clean rubber band could be useful, though never glamorous. Then there were industries that used rubber bands in ways the object never consented to, as spacers in machinery, as shock absorbers for prototypes, as alignment tools in early robotics. The bands did not rebel. They complied. not because they were built for it, but because they were willing to try. One small manufacturer in Sweden, for example, used rubber bands to bind together the instruction booklets for self-assembled furniture. Not stapled, not shrink-wrapped, just looped once around the slim sheaf of multilingual directions. The customer would remove it, discard it, forget it. But for a moment, it had served. And yet, for all this versatility, the rubber band never required certification, no user manual, no regulation. It did not change shape to adapt. The world changed to include it. Infrastructure emerged with the assumption of its availability. In some countries, the bands became so integral that local dialects developed specific terms, not rubber band, but something altogether their own, small linguistic nods to an object too useful to be foreign. A naturalized loop. Meanwhile, artists and tinkerers found new relationships with the band, not in satire, but in sincerity. Rubber band sculptures, woven bracelets, kinetic installations that relied on tension and release. The object ceased to be merely functional. It became metaphor. It spoke not just of containment, but of resilience, repetition, limitation, potential. A small gallery in Kyoto once featured an exhibit titled Elastic Memory. Each piece consisted of a rubber band stretched across found objects: a matchbox, a feather, a seashell. The tension spoke louder than the items it joined, a whisper of force, a hint of intention. The museum owns one such piece, on loan. It sits in a glass case, where the band is now sagged, its tension gone. The art remains, but the grip has loosened. The message is stronger for it. Of course, not every encounter with the rubber band is benevolent. Hair pulled too tightly, fingers snapped in error, documents destroyed by a band too eager to contract. The loop can punish, not out of malice, but out of simple design. It is not a servant, it is a force, held gently at bay. And sometimes it fails in the opposite direction. Too loose, too stretched, a band past its prime. There is a peculiar sadness to these, the ones that no longer return to form, like memories that refuse to sharpen, or promises that outlive their intent. We have a tray marked exhausted bands. They are no longer circular. They lie in tangles, exhausted from service, no longer fit for work, but too iconic for discard. They represent a life of modest effort, of containment without complaint. And so we see that the rubber band, for all its quiet duty, participates in the rhythms of the world far more deeply than it admits. It is not just a thing that holds other things. It is a loop of action, a soft machinery, a contract written in silence. Let us then not call it mundane. Let us call it consistent. Let us not call it forgettable. Let us call it faithful, and let us continue into deeper corners, stranger uses, and the philosophical loops still to come. Among the lesser visited vitrines of the museum stands a simple cardboard box, its edges frayed, its top left unsealed. Inside, 1,000 rubber bands, each used, none alike. They vary in stretch, in shade, in memory. Together they form a history not of the object itself, but of its users. The postal clerks, the librarians, the lunch-packing parents, all those who reached instinctively for a loop, and found without fail that the loop was already reaching back. In this part of our contemplation, we shift our gaze not from function to failure, but from task to role. For the rubber band has over time become more than a tool. It has become an assumption, a background condition, something so present that its absence is noticed more than its use. Consider the emergency drawer, the one filled with batteries that no longer hold charge, cables for devices long obsolete, and inevitably rubber bands, often tangled, sometimes fused into a single knot of unfulfilled purpose. They rest there in expectation. We don't throw them away. We don't remember why we kept them, and yet we know they will be useful. Someday, this quiet preparedness is perhaps the rubber band's greatest cultural role, the symbol of readiness, of something held lightly together until needed more firmly, of potential, not action, of the pause before the gesture. In relationships, we speak of elastic bonds, not rigid ties, but those that stretch and recover. In psychology, we reference the rubber band theory of emotional distance, that pulling too far invites tension, but proximity without space collapses autonomy. The metaphor stretches quite literally from the drawer to the heart. And in economics, the rubber band appears again, this time as model, supply and demand as tension, market corrections as snapback, a system stretched to instability until release resets the cycle. Even language mimics the band. Phrases like snapped, stretched thin, or pulled together owe quiet debts to the object's nature. The band becomes a linguistic ghost, haunting idioms with its silent properties. And then there is music. Though never designed for it, rubber bands have long been conscripted into the service of sound. Strung across boxes, plucked by small fingers, they produce tones somewhere between accidental and earnest. A twang not quite musical, yet charming in its defiance. Instruments of first curiosity. A child's first harp, discovered on a cereal box. Some musicians, more daring, have incorporated them deliberately, as dampeners, as tuners, as provocations. A piano prepared with rubber bands sounds like memory underwater. A guitar looped at the bridge plays not notes, but textures. The museum once hosted a recital titled Tension Studies in E-flat. An ensemble of cellists and percussionists played not their instruments, but their constraints. Rubber bands looped across snares, around bows, within resonant boxes. The result was neither melodic nor chaotic. It was, in the critic's words, structurally wistful. In the world of art, the rubber band has performed as medium and muse, wrapped around canvases, stretched over frames, used to create tension on surfaces. It is the one material that both marks space and refuses to stay still. It is border and motion at once. One sculpture, entitled Discipline, consists of 800 white rubber bands looped between steel pins across a black velvet wall. Visitors reported a sense of unease, like walking through someone else's sense of order. The tension was visual, but also deeply emotional. And then there is the band's accidental symbolism. For some, it became a wristband, a silent protest, a cause, a memory. Worn not for style, but for solidarity. The yellow band for awareness, the black band for mourning, the rubber band, repurposed as identity. None of this was intended, and that is precisely the point. The rubber band does not intend. It does not push itself into roles or request acknowledgement. It does not brand itself. It merely conforms, adapts, participates. A willing collaborator in whatever script it's handed, it has no ideology, no instruction, no expiry date beyond material fatigue, and yet it is everywhere, both as object and as idea. Its cultural saturation is so complete that parody becomes difficult. One cannot exaggerate a thing that is already absurd in its simplicity. A loop of latex, that's all. And yet, more. We hold one now, an ordinary tan band between two fingers. It is unremarkable in every way, but in this light, in this silence, it begins to suggest something else. Not just usefulness, not just presence, but permission. Permission to stretch, to return, to be shaped by the needs of the moment, and then to rest, unjudged, in a drawer until next time. And perhaps that, in the end, is all we ever wanted from the world, to stretch when asked, to hold when needed, and to be let go softly and with grace when the task is done. In the museum's acoustically silent room, designed not for spectacle, but for listening to the absence of sound, a single rubber band hangs suspended. It is not stretched. It does not move. It merely hovers between two thin rods, a gesture frozen in time. Visitors often miss it, mistaking it for a mounting wire or an oversight in installation, and yet, in that stillness, it performs its final, most abstract function, presence without action. This is the paradox of the rubber band. Its identity lies in movement, yet its most common state is rest. It exists at all times in the gap between potential and purpose. It is a waiting loop. Let us now consider the shape more closely. A rubber band, when laid flat, is an oval, or a flattened circle, or an unfinished figure eight with aspirations toward geometry. It has no defined start, no required orientation. It can be flipped, rotated, twisted, yet it never resists. This shape, so unremarkable in theory, is in practice one of the most versatile in the tactile world. It is not symmetrical in the classical sense, unless designed to be, but it holds symmetry in behavior. Stretch it along any axis, and it replies the same way. Gently, then firmly, then decisively, should you go too far. This elasticity, this gradated resistance, offers not just containment, but communication. It tells the user where the boundary lies, not with force, but with suggestion. The physics of the band are, of course, well understood. Hookean models, modulus of elasticity, entropy-driven return, but none of this is required knowledge to operate one. That is part of the elegance. It teaches you how to use it by how it behaves. No manuals, no calibration. It is, in that way, a tactile tutorial in boundaries. We stretch one here, in the museum's study chamber, between thumb and forefinger, slowly, deliberately, not to break it, but to feel its reply. The band lengthens with a patient reluctance, then a dignified protest, a warning intention, and then, if pushed too far, a decision. Snap. It is not loud, but it is final. The broken band tells a story of limits found and exceeded. It is not a failure, but a lesson. That even the most flexible things have endings. That resilience, though admirable, is not infinite. The museum collects such endings. A drawer labeled Failures in Stretch holds dozens of bands, snapped cleanly, sometimes jaggedly, in half. Some are brittle from age, others fresh from overuse. Each one marks a moment when expectations surpassed reality, when the loop could stretch no further. There is no blame. We display them, not in shame, but in celebration. The act of breaking is, after all, a kind of honesty. In certain philosophical traditions, the rubber band has been used as a metaphor for perception. How far can one's worldview be expanded before it no longer returns to its original shape? How much change can be absorbed before identity itself fractures? These are not idle thoughts. structure of the loop. Politicians at times have brandished rubber bands to demonstrate flexibility in policy. Educators have snapped them to illustrate tension in systems. Therapists have used them in exercises, on wrists as reminders. A soft sting to mark the moment a thought should pause. The band crosses into ritual. In some circles, bands are used to bind scrolls, sacred or secular. In others, they close prayer bundles. In moments of transition, weddings, funerals, graduations, a rubber band might quietly secure a bouquet, a scroll, a keepsake box. The band is not symbolic, but it is there, always there. In science fiction literature, one finds occasional reference to loop artifacts, self-correcting systems that restore balance after deviation. The metaphor is not accidental. Authors recognize in the band a physical analog to narrative order. It bends, but returns. Unless, of course, it doesn't. And then the loop becomes a line, a break in the cycle. That too is present in our collection. A series of conceptual diagrams, loop, 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 then line. Rubber bands have been used in teaching, in geometry to demonstrate tension and curve, in physics to explore stored energy, in psychology as fidgets, in architecture to model tension-based structures. Not because the rubber band is accurate, but because it is available, and reliable, and willing. This willingness, so rarely named, yet ever present, is what elevates the band beyond mere tool. It accepts whatever is asked of it until it cannot. And even then, it does not protest. It simply releases. A final thought from the case notes of an archivist in the museum. The rubber band reminds me not of machines, but of breath. In, out, expansion, return. It lives in the rhythm of things. And so we return quietly to the object suspended in the soundless room. It is not doing anything, but it is not nothing. It is there, holding a space in shape alone, ready, still, waiting. Behind a pane of non-reflective glass in Gallery 4B sits a modest display, a loaf of bread, long since hardened, wrapped tightly with a single aged rubber band. The exhibit bears no plaque. It is neither art nor artifact. It is what it is, an echo of a domestic instinct, the desire to keep things together just a little longer than nature intended. And so we arrive at the domestic mythology of the rubber band, not merely its use, but its place in memory. Few objects have participated so widely in daily life without ever rising to the level of nostalgia. It is not treasured. It is not missed. And yet, once evoked, it appears everywhere in recollection. The kitchen drawer, the pencil tin, the glove compartment, the top of the refrigerator. Rubber bands collect themselves in locations where decisions are deferred. They do not organize. They await instruction. Some families designate a jar or tin for them. An empty yogurt cup, a biscuit tin, an envelope marked bands. But most do not. They are scattered like punctuation across domestic space, sometimes looped around each other as if seeking community. We opened one such household box from 1974. Inside, spare buttons, 3 Canadian coins, a safety pin, and 22 rubber bands. Each bore the dust of its era. One still held a trace of flour, likely from a bag long discarded. Another had fused slightly to an old AA battery. Their stories are not dramatic, but they are complete. This is the quiet power of the rubber band. It anchors the mundane, It becomes part of systems not because it demands to be, but because it functions so well no one questions its inclusion. When something lacks closure, we reach for it. Even pets encounter rubber bands. Cats chase them. Dogs chew them. Parrots, given the opportunity, will unloop them with inexplicable precision. They are a cross-species curiosity. No animal truly understands their purpose, nor, perhaps, do we. In school settings, the rubber band is nearly elemental. Children find endless mischief in it. They launch it, twist it, braid it, weaponize it in slow-motion ambushes. Teachers confiscate handfuls daily, yet even as a disciplinary object, the band endures. It is the gateway to understanding force, trajectory, resistance, all without formal instruction. In adolescence, the rubber band acquires new roles: fashion accessory, nervous fidget, message courier. It may loop around a folded note, a locker key, a wrist. It absorbs emotional static, not intentionally, of course, but reliably. One specimen in our collection, a simple pink band, lightly frayed, once bound a letter written in pencil on rolled paper. The note reads only, "Meet me behind the music room." The author and recipient are unknown. The date is guessed. The band, however, preserved its secret for 40 years. In adulthood, we forget the band until it reappears around the bunch of herbs, around a legal document, around a stack of bills. It says nothing, but it says enough. This was held briefly, with care. Even in old age, the band returns, in memory boxes, in sewing kits, in drawers no longer opened daily. It becomes part of the gentle sediment of life, objects too trivial to display, too familiar to discard. Some have wrapped them around doorknobs, not for function, but as habit. Others use them to slow the closure of cabinet doors, to remind themselves gently that everything resists permanence. The band stretches, yes, but it also returns. Cultural variations in band use are minor, but telling. In Japan, bands are often designed with more color precision, pastel loops that match packaging. In Italy, a regional bakery uses wide blue bands to wrap paper around fresh bread. In Brazil, fruit vendors bind paper signs to crates with broad rubber loops that glow orange under the sun. The band becomes part of the mise-en-scène. No matter the location, the loop's behavior remains unchanged. It is democratic, impartial, functional. It does not care who uses it or for what. It simply conforms. This indifference is, in fact, its genius. It offers no resistance to reinterpretation. It allows itself to be part of whatever system needs it. That is not compliance. It is design without ego. In spiritual practice, the rubber band has even found unlikely application. In mindfulness exercises, practitioners are told to stretch a band between fingers slowly and focus on the sensation, not to snap it, not to analyze it, just to feel the tension grow and fade. A breath in latex. In our museum gift shop, we sell reproductions of antique bands, though the phrase itself is an oxymoron. A band, once aged, loses its bandness. It becomes a circle only in theory. But visitors still purchase them, not for use, but for reassurance. To have one in the pocket. A gesture of containment. So here, at the middle point between memory and metaphor, we hold up the rubber band once more, not to stretch it, not to display it, but simply to acknowledge it. Not everything that matters demands a story. Some things matter precisely because they don't. There is a corridor in the museum rarely visited, not because it is hidden, but because it is overlooked. It runs parallel to the galleries of pins and paperweights, narrow and beige, with lighting set 1 lumen too low for confidence. Along its length, encased in identical shadow boxes, stretch hundreds of rubber bands, each one arranged not to display, but to rest. They are not labeled, they are not explained, they simply are. Their presence forms a timeline, though no one has dared assign dates. Here, we explore the long arc of global adoption, how the rubber band, born from trees and cut by machines, seeped gently into systems and rituals that never asked for it, until they did. In trade, the rubber band bridged nations, bundles of import forms, stacks of receipts, rolls of foreign currency, all held temporarily by loops that cared nothing for borders. Export agents in Malaysia looped them around duty stamps. Customs officers in Denmark snapped them off suspicious parcels with practiced grace. The band became international, not in ambition, but in default. It was simply everywhere. In military contexts, the band found its place quietly. It bound maps, secured cables, sealed rations. Soldiers, ever pragmatic, used them for tourniquets, slings, or to keep rolled socks from unrolling. Tactical kits included them not as strategy, but as sense. They were the sort of tool one included because something, anything, might require containment. Even espionage found occasion for the ban. A declassified field manual from the 1960s includes the suggestion: a rubber band may be used to temporarily disable a rotary dial telephone. The exact method is not explained, but one assumes it worked at least once. In disaster response, the band proves again its value. Emergency supply bags packed by relief workers include them for sealing, bundling, securing. Their function is not predefined. They are brought along simply because they might help. In chaos, the simplest things survive. One container in our archives is marked Red Cross 1984. Inside, a field medic's kit, scissors, gauze, iodine, and a small sealed pouch containing 3 rubber bands, slightly sun-bleached. They were not used. They were just there, and still are. As digital infrastructure expanded, one might assume the rubber band would retreat. But the opposite occurred. With more cables, more peripherals, more chargers came more need to organize them, and while zip ties promised permanence, rubber bands offered forgiveness. They could be undone, redone, moved, replaced. They did not scar. In tech spaces, where the aesthetic leans minimal but the cables remain maximal, bands are often hidden behind desks, looped into drawers, or bundled discreetly beneath conference tables. Their presence is denied in design, but embraced in reality. Clean lines maintained by soft loops. In fashion logistics, rubber bands keep order behind the scenes. Garment tags, buttons, pattern rolls, shoelaces in transit. They are backstage workers of textile organization, more reliable than clips, less aggressive than pins. A band will not snag silk. It holds with grace. Even in the world of literature, the rubber band has a presence, not in metaphor alone, but in practice. Archivists bind manuscripts not with string, but with neutral pH paper, and yes, rubber bands. Temporarily, reversibly, kindly, because some documents want to breathe. We house in our collection a rejection letter from a publishing house dated 1932, returned to the author still bound in the very band they had wrapped around their manuscript. The loop, now brittle, has outlived the publisher, not the author. In transportation logistics, the band is an unsung hero. It marks baggage, identifies groupings, signals urgency through color coding. Delivery workers use them to sort addresses, to attach notes, to improvise repairs. The band may not speed a parcel, but it will, at the very least, hold it one moment longer. And in prison economies, strange, intricate systems of barter and trust, the rubber band becomes currency, not valuable in itself, but as means to bundle cigarettes, to seal makeshift containers, to pass notes in concealment. In a world of scarcity, the ability to bind something becomes power. So widespread is the band that some systems have begun to imitate it. Reusable silicon loops, plastic cable ties with tension memory, digital interfaces that mimic elastic behavior. The metaphor infects design. Stretch, snap, rebound, hold. The rubber band is no longer merely a tool, it is a model. And all this from a loop of rubber cut from a tube, sold in bags without names. The most global of inventions, achieved without globalization. The most standardized tool, with no single standard. It belongs to no one, and yet to everyone. And perhaps in that, it reveals the shape of usefulness, not as assertion, but as invitation. To bind not with force, but with offer. To hold, but not cling. And in that gentle principle, the rubber band, quiet, ready, unranked, has traveled farther than it ever stretched. Near the quietest stairwell in the museum, beside a thermostat that no longer functions, and beneath a sign that reads only utility, there stands a revolving carousel of forgotten applications. Visitors rarely notice it. Some assume it's a janitorial relic, but if you pause and turn it slowly, you will see. Clipped in clear sleeves are photographs of rubber bands mid-duty, in context neither historic nor heroic, merely specific. A flute's pads held in place during repair. A camera's broken battery latch made functional again. A stack of postcards from 1946 still perfectly aligned. These are not inventions. They are interventions. And so we come to the ingenuity of misuse. How the rubber band, despite its humble origins and predictable behavior, has been adapted into 1,000 unintended roles. Not through design, but through desperation, curiosity, and boredom. Consider the door latch, a band looped around the inside knob, stretched across the bolt, and hooked to the outer knob, holding the latch depressed. A temporary solution for a door that insists on locking. Not elegant, not permanent, but perfect. Or the toothbrush stand, cobbled from 2 pencils and a single rubber band twisted into tension. Or the page-turning device, where a band loops around a toe and connects to a bent paperclip, used by a bedridden patient to read without assistance. One might argue these are improvisations, not true uses. But improvisation is merely design done in real time. Musicians, particularly percussionists, have long known the band's value. Stretched over drums, it dampens overtones. Wrapped around sticks, it alters grip. In practice spaces, bands replace broken straps, reinforce cables, bundle sheet music. The museum holds a violin mute constructed from a rubber band and a folded business card, used by a concertmaster during rehearsals to simulate a pianissimo passage, too delicate for neighbors. It produced not beauty, but compliance, and sometimes that's what practice demands. In bicycle repair, Rubber bands have sealed cables, gripped tools, marked chain tension. A small London courier service distributed bands with their logo printed on them, not for promotion, but to secure pant legs against chain grease. Branding through friction. In the world of electronics, the band has kept power buttons depressed, held battery compartments shut, and even triggered resets when jammed across two contacts, though none of these are recommended nor safe. But they worked. Once, maybe twice. The museum once received a letter from a lighthouse keeper in Newfoundland. She enclosed a band and a note. This held the foghorn button down for 2 hours while I repaired the switch. I don't trust many things, but I trust this. The band is now mounted under a softly glowing bulb, slightly singed, entirely whole. Rubber bands have also been found in sculpture, coiled into towers, woven into mats, layered into textures that defy material expectation. Artists explore them not as tools, but as texture. One installation involved 6,000 white rubber bands stretched across a gallery like spider webs. Visitors were asked to walk slowly. Many did not. Children, of course, remain the band's most inventive users. They loop them into chains, weapons, bridges, puzzles. They discover kinetic potential before understanding vocabulary. To them, a band is not for anything. It just is, and therefore, everything. In outdoor survival manuals, bands are sometimes listed under miscellaneous equipment. They can bundle fire-starting materials, seal water containers, hold tarp corners, and in one particularly creative example, function as a temporary tourniquet while building a better one. The band saves time and sometimes lives. Even in funerary practice, the band has appeared, not formally, but incidentally. Letters placed in urns, held shut by thin tan loops. Locks of hair bound gently. A photo album of the deceased, held closed with a crimson band, now faded to rust. The band asks for no role. It simply accepts one. There is a kind of humility in that so many people, across so many situations, have turned to this object, this featureless loop, for help, that it neither judged nor failed them, that its lack of specificity became a form of generosity. A drawer in the museum is labeled simply, etc. Inside, we've placed hundreds of photographs, sketches, written notes of things held by rubber bands, not because they were important, but because they were not. And still, they mattered. And perhaps that is the final misused role of the rubber band, to make the unimportant stay together long enough to be noticed. It does not preserve. It does not transform. It merely holds, lightly but with conviction, until we are ready to let go. And that, strangely, is sometimes everything. In the climate-controlled hush of the museum, as central archive, lies a sealed drawer, marked post-function. Inside, not exhibits, but residue. Rubber bands that have given up their structure entirely. No longer loops, they curl like onion skins or crackle under breath. These are the remains not of failure, but of exhaustion. Bands that did everything asked of them, and then unspooled into entropy. And so we arrive at the long twilight of the rubber band's life cycle. Not every object is designed to age gracefully. Some tarnish into beauty. Some patinate. Others, like the band, simply decay, unnoticed, until the moment one reaches for them, and they crumble like old bread. Rubber ages according to its formula, its exposure, its use. Natural rubber, sensitive to ultraviolet light and ozone, will stiffen, crack, collapse. Synthetic variants may resist longer, but their end is much the same. Time asks questions the band was never meant to answer, and yet this impermanence is not a defect. It is an honesty of materials. The band never promised longevity. It promised flexibility and delivered until it couldn't. The museum keeps a log of first failures, those moments when an object, still in service, breaks. A bag of postage slips open, a stack of cards scatters, a drawer closes, and something gives. These failures are not tragic, they are inevitable. We mark them not with disappointment, but with quiet applause. The band did not lie. It simply completed its purpose. In environmental terms, the band presents a modern tension. Natural rubber is biodegradable, but not quickly. Synthetics can persist, and while their size renders them harmless in singular form, their volume, billions per year, raises the question of silent accumulation. Few think to recycle a rubber band. Fewer still consider its ecological afterlife. It is small and thus forgiven, but mass produces its own gravity. There are efforts, biodegradable bands crafted from new blends, compostable alternatives made from starch-based polymers. Yet their performance rarely matches that of their ancestral latex. The choice becomes philosophical, performance, or principle. The museum's environmental wing includes a terrarium titled Persistence. Within, buried in layers of soil, lie bands from 5 decades, observed but untouched. Some have vanished, others endure, pale and defiant. Time is patient. An economic afterlife, the rubber band has also evolved. Some companies now market premium bands, color-matched, UV-resistant, scented. One might scoff, but even humility is not immune to branding. Luxury, it seems, finds a way. Still, in its final form, slackened, brittle, inert, the band remains useful, at least to the imaginative. Artists collect old bands for texture. Teachers demonstrate decay. Children crush them between fingers, fascinated by the gentle flake of something once strong. And when finally discarded, the band does not lament. It joins the waste stream quietly. No protest, no collapse, just a soft departure from purpose. The museum once hosted a ceremonial retirement drawer into which visitors could deposit their expired bands. There was no ritual, only stillness, a sense that these objects had earned a place beyond usefulness. The drawer is now full, closed permanently, its contents uncounted. What is remarkable is how rarely we grieve the band's passing. When one breaks, we replace it immediately, almost reflexively. No pause, no question, as though it had not just fulfilled its entire function in one final gesture. And perhaps that's the lesson, that value is not always in endurance. Sometimes it is in the clean line of completion. The philosopher's loop ends not in permanence, but in grace. The rubber band never fought its fate. It stretched, it held, it broke, and in so doing, it illustrated the simplest arc of effort, to try and then to stop. In that stop, there is no shame. There is only the echo of tension released. So here, in this gallery of faded rings and soft remains, we acknowledge the quiet bravery of temporary things, of objects that say yes until they can say no, and say nothing after that. Let us not look away. Let us thank the loop. Let us let it rest. On the final shelf before the threshold to the museum at Reflection Hall stands a narrow wooden drawer, labeled simply, Return. Inside, each rubber band has been placed in a gentle spiral, coiled not tightly, but with something resembling affection. No longer in use, not quite broken, they lie in repose, soft witnesses to the lives they briefly circled. This is the culmination of the band's practical history. Its journey from tree to tool, from slice to service, has now stretched to its final utility. But before we turn toward meaning, let us linger a moment longer in the domain of pure material. The global volume of rubber bands produced each year remains difficult to track, not because it is secret, but because it is overlooked. Few count them, fewer report them. They are classified under stationary or miscellaneous, yet they pour from factories in every country, in every shade, size, and tension. The cost of a single band is negligible. The cost of billions is substantial. Yet even in scale, the band refuses to draw attention to itself. It does not demand ethical consumption. It does not protest its labor. It simply accumulates in drawers and workflows, multiplying in silence. Distribution, too, is informal. Bands arrive not through ceremony, but through inclusion. One buys broccoli and receives one, orders a parcel, finds one in the packaging, receives a letter, discovers one looped around the paperwork. They are the stowaways of exchange, the hitchhikers of modern logistics, and still they are never described, rarely listed in inventories, never celebrated in product reviews. A testimony, perhaps, to how truly integrated they have become. The sign of an object so successful that it transcends notice. In the history of design, such objects are few. The paperclip, the safety pin, the drinking straw. Things that solve a problem so elegantly they become invisible. But unlike those, the rubber band possesses an elasticity, not just in function, but in identity. It can belong to the office, the kitchen, the lab, the playground. It can be utilitarian, decorative, experimental. It can vanish and return, forgotten and then indispensable. This ubiquity raises philosophical questions. Can something so adaptable retain any essence? Does a rubber band have identity beyond its usefulness? One scholar of material culture wrote, "The rubber band is the closest thing we have to a physical shrug. Perhaps that is its power. It accepts whatever is asked of it, without protest, without imprint. It offers resistance without rebellion, support without structure, usefulness without signature. It is the ultimate understudy, ready to replace whatever was supposed to hold things together when that thing fails. And ironically, it rarely fails." The museum maintains a collection called Holding Patterns, a photographic series documenting rubber bands in situ across 30 countries. The commonality is eerie. The drawer in Johannesburg mirrors the one in Buenos Aires. The bundle in Seoul echoes the one in Helsinki. The function is not taught. It is inherited intuitively. This shared understanding suggests something deeper, that in the band we have created an object so fundamentally aligned with our instincts, to group, to secure, to simplify, that it became almost biological in its adoption. It is no longer a tool. It is an extension of impulse, and so we approach the threshold of abstraction, the final corridors of the museum where things stop being objects and begin to be ideas, where rubber ceases to be rubber and becomes rhythm. But before we cross that line, we pause, here at the quiet end of function, a drawer of spiraled loops, each one having held something, each one no longer holding, each one still complete. We have reached the point in our journey where rubber band, no longer bound to action, becomes metaphor, where it slips loose from the pencil case and the filing cabinet and finds itself, tentatively, uncertainly, on the desk of the philosopher. Here, in this final gallery, the lights dim not from failure, but from contemplation. The cases are fewer, the objects less physical. A single rubber band suspended in a vertical beam of light casts a perfect elliptical shadow on a slab of limestone. There is no label. There is no need, because now we ask, what has this object taught us? It has no voice, no message, no variation in tone, and yet somehow it speaks. We stretch the band, and it resists. We release it, and it returns. Unless stretched too far, then it breaks. The metaphor writes itself, and still we overlook it. The rubber band is not a symbol because we made it one. It is a symbol because it cannot help being one. Its behavior maps onto our behaviors. Its endurance mirrors our resilience. Its failures echo our own limitations. In therapy, it becomes a grounding object, snapped gently on the wrist to bring the mind back into the body. In education, it teaches the principles of potential energy without ever requiring a battery. In management seminars, it is held aloft to illustrate flexibility. In poetry, it appears as metaphor for tension, release, return. It stretches between lovers who live apart. It binds letters not yet sent. It waits, coiled on the corner of a page. And like all useful metaphors, it does not strain under scrutiny. The band contains opposites without contradiction. It is closed, yet open. It is still, yet ready. It is simple, yet comprehensive. In spiritual teachings, the rubber band has been invoked as a model for balance. Too much tension, and it snaps. Too little, and it falls limp. Somewhere in between, function. In modern philosophy, the band offers a gentle counterpoint to rigid systems, where the structure is not fixed, but adaptive, where form is found not in defiance, but in cooperation. The band is not a wall, it is a threshold. There is beauty in that. Beauty not in ornament, but in obedience to necessity. The kind of beauty found in bridges and seed pods and breath. Quiet beauty. We once invited a group of writers to compose meditations on the rubber band. Most declined, finding the topic too mundane. One returned a single sentence. It holds everything I didn't want to forget. We etched that sentence onto the wall of this gallery, because it is true. The rubber band is not the object we remember. It is the object that helped us remember others. It held the stack of notes. It kept the letter closed. It marked the page. It restrained the thing that would have spilled, scattered, drifted. In this way, the rubber band becomes a custodian of meaning. Not a vessel, but a perimeter. Not a container, but a condition. And when it fails, when it breaks or disappears, it does so without protest. It accepts its role in the system as transient. Its usefulness lies not in presence, but in timing. It is an object that knows when to let go. Perhaps this is the highest form of usefulness, not to endure forever, but to serve precisely as long as needed. The museum's last display is a wall, blank except for a single framed loop. It has no pedestal. It hangs on a pin, not stretched, not limp, just resting in tensionless neutrality. The plaque reads, "This band once held nothing perfectly." And in doing so, it held space. It made room. It provided a circle into which anything could enter. stay a while, and depart. That is not trivial. That is profound. In the final alcove of the museum, where footfalls soften and time feels slightly out of step, a low bench invites the viewer to sit. Opposite, a wall of muted gray, nothing displayed, no object mounted. Only a shadow, the oval cast by a rubber band hung in light some hours ago, since removed. This is the echo of a thing no longer present, and it is, perhaps, the best way to end. We have followed the rubber band through matter and metaphor, from sap to symbol, from kitchen drawer to philosophical inquiry. We have seen it hold, stretch, fail, return. And now we see what remains when its presence is no longer required. A shape, a memory, a suggestion of enclosure. And this, ultimately, is a gift of the rubber band. It does not cling. It does not declare. It does not insist on permanence. It offers what is needed, for as long as it is needed, and then recedes. We live in a world saturated with devices designed to retain, to grip, to accumulate. The rubber band offers something else: permission to hold loosely, to encircle without enclosing, to support without binding. Its virtue lies in non-insistence. In a culture obsessed with the tightness of control, the rubber band reminds us that tension is not a flaw, it is a phase. Something to move through, to return from. That letting go is not failure, it is function fulfilled. There is a certain kindness in its simplicity. No moving parts, no learning curve, no ego. It does not ask to be improved. It has already reached the lowest possible form of sufficient design. And so we thank it, not for what it is, but for how it behaves, for being ready without anticipation, for being present without demand, for returning again and again until it does not, and even then, for not making a scene. As we leave this quiet place, we may feel tempted to take a band from the reception counter, a small loop, beige and unimpressive, given freely. We may place it in a pocket or around the wrist, or in a drawer where others already wait. It will not object. It will not announce its presence. It will remain silent until asked to act. And when it does, it will do so with the grace of something that understands exactly what it is for, and no more. And so the rubber band, stretched and released, rests again, soft in memory, flexible in meaning, always ready to begin anew.